I'm Chance Dorland, and this is In-Depth, an interview program from ExpressNews.com with in-depth reporting and other resources for stories affecting San Antonio and Bexar County. Express News reporter Lauren Karuba and photographer Lisa Krantz recently teamed up to chart the recovery of a 6-year-old more than a year after the Sutherland Springs church shooting. The pair observed Rylan Ward's recovery from devastating gunshot wounds with cooperation from his family and treating physicians as he received occupational therapy at the Children's Rehabilitation Institute Telethon USA in San Antonio. And Karuba interviewed his surgeon, child psychiatrist, and rehab physician as well as his family members. All that and more is available online at expressnews.com. The link to that story is included in today's description for the episode we're recording right now, where I'm joined by Express News photographer Lisa Krantz to get a perspective that we really haven't had here yet on the In-Depth podcast. So Lisa, great to have you here on the podcast for the first time. As I just mentioned, not only are we going to be discussing your involvement with this recent story following the recovery of 6-year-old Rylan Ward, we're going to talk about what it's been like being behind the camera, covering this and other stories from the San Antonio Express News. But first, let's start with how you and Lauren Karuba got paired together for this story.
Well, I'm the photographer who has been photographing the community in Sutherland Springs and mainly focused on the church. And I've been doing that since early December, primarily. And so I believe the story was pitched to her by someone from the crit, and she, proposed it to her editor, and then I was the photographer to do it because I've been photographing Ryland, here and there for several months whenever I would see him at church or, Sylvia Foster Frau, and I did do another story on him earlier in the spring. So I was the natural choice for a photographer to do it because I'm already, know some of the family and know Ryland.
As you just mentioned, there have been different Express News reporters working on stories covering what happened in Sutherland Springs, but it sounds like you've been more or less the photographer who's been going with them. Have you been just as involved with the families, or as a photographer, do you stay off more to the side while the reporter is doing the interviews? What's that dynamic like?
Well, I'm probably a little more involved because I have more flexibility in my schedule to spend time with them. So I've spent, a lot of time in the community and a lot of time getting to know the people and hearing their stories and building trust with them. So, and usually I have to be pretty close to people because to photograph them, I have to be pretty close. Both I have to know them well and I have to be physically close to them because we can't do our jobs from anywhere else except for near people. So I can't do anything from the office. I can't do anything over the phone. So I've spent a lot of time with them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Other than, as you just mentioned, emails, telephone, any ways you can get in touch with people digitally, remotely, photography, unlike a lot of other things, still has to be done on the ground.
Yep, exactly. So I had to be there in the community and at the church really as much as possible. And I wasn't the photographer that was there in the beginning for the immediate news coverage. I wasn't there in the first several weeks. I didn't start going until early December of 2017.
So now let's go back to the story of the young child, Rylan Ward, who's the focus of this most recent article between yourself and Lauren that once again is available at expressnews.com, and the link is available in today's episode description. After that shooting, Rylan lay in a medically induced coma. His family members had to contend not only with the enormity of his medical needs that are still ongoing, but also with the fact that they lost his stepmother, her daughters, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old daughter, and of course many other Sutherland Springs residents who, while not blood family, were like family to them, a very close-knit community with that church. But even before that, it turns out he was the first victim of the massacre to arrive at University Hospital. He got there by helicopter, multiple wounds, went through so many surgeries. And even that day that he arrived there, there would have only been a handful of people who could have helped him, but just by a twist of fate, luck of the day, more trauma surgeons and a team of specialists were there for a completely different reason, and he really was lucky in that way. It's now been more than a year. You have been spending time with him and other people in the community, as you just mentioned, on the ground doing photography. And you've also seen the rehab that Ryland has been going through. What has that been like? What have you been seeing?
So I didn't see Ryland's early rehab when he was in the hospital. The media was not allowed with him. The family did share photos, and so people were able to see how well he was doing throughout his hospitalization. And it just goes to show the resilience of children, both physically and mentally, because he just seemed to start running around pretty early on, relative to his injuries. So I first saw him in church. It was a Sunday service, and he went with his grandparents. I want to say it was February or March. It might have been March. I can't remember the exact date. And he just was running around and immediately grabbed my camera and started taking pictures of people with my camera. And he's done that every single time I've seen him. The first time I saw him, I didn't even take any pictures, partially because he moves so fast. It's hard to photograph him sometimes. And he's just gotten faster. So I know his rehab has been tremendous, and he's had a ton of physical and occupational therapy. And yesterday I was actually able to photograph him at music therapy in Lavernia, and that's the Ecumenical Center puts puts that together, and it's the Center for Healing and Hope of South Texas, and that's in Lavernia. And they actually have 3 different locations, and they've been working with survivors of the tragedy since the day that it happened. So they've been very involved, and so I photographed him over the summer, actually at a wellness camp that was held at with the Ecumenical Center and their Center for Healing and Hope. And they had a wellness camp at River Oaks Church, which is the other church in Sutherland Springs. And they had it for survivors and also just children in the community who have been affected.
And as you mentioned, you've been involved with more than just Ryland and his family. So, what has it been like photographing survivors of the Sutherland Springs shooting compared to other stories you've been involved with? I'm sure some stories are very mundane and you just have to go get the picture, but I'm guessing this is really different.
Yeah, this has been, I mean, there's nothing quite like this. I mean, you certainly the 5th largest mass shooting in the United States. I mean, just to um, wrap your head around that is pretty difficult in itself. So I still don't know if I can wrap my head around it because, of course, I wasn't there and haven't experienced anything like that, and hopefully, no one else ever will. And there's so many people involved too. So trying to tell so many different stories of so many different people, and then some people were wanted to tell their stories early on, and some have just decided that maybe they want to share their story a year later. So it's been quite a process in terms of telling their stories and or being the way that their stories are told, and just kind of going on this journey of watching them heal and watching like their strength and their faith come together and how much they supported each other. And I think it actually kind of sets them apart from some of the other mass shootings because they already had this family unit that was already loving and supportive of each other. And so they've all been able to support each other. So that's really what I've tried to photograph throughout too. So it's actually like seeing their healing has been, probably the biggest part of the story that we've told.
As with any type of photography, often it's the case that you want to get a photo where, the people and whatever's going through your lens is not staged, it's not set up, it looks a little natural. Um, since you and other Express News reporters, people from all over the country have been in Sutherland Springs on and off for about the last year, um, the people that you've been working with, telling their story through photography with different reporters, have they grown accustomed to seeing you and other people carrying around very expensive professional equipment? Was that ever an issue? I'm wondering if that dynamic has changed at all over this time because it's just been so long.
Well, yeah, I mean, they definitely, I think, got used to me. And I mean, they definitely, Sylvia and I are the reporter and photographer team that I think they're the most comfortable with. We've definitely been there way more than anyone else. And I think, you know, it would probably be weirder now if we left than that we're there. I don't travel with a lot of equipment, so I don't usually just have one camera. Every once in a while, I have two. And, we've become very close with them too. So it develops into a relationship all its own, aside from just, being the journalist that come into their town. It's definitely evolves into more than that. So, and that would be, I mean, and that's the only way really to be able to do a story like this that's so, involves such trauma and is from such a tragedy.
Just now, off the top of your head, as I ask you this question, I'm wondering if there are any photos of Ryland or his family or anyone else that you've been working with in the Sutherland Springs community that really come to mind when you think about some of your favorite photos or just ones you can't believe that you were able to get?
Well, I think Ryland for a lot of people like a representation of the healing too. I mean, everyone, of course, you're gonna want the child who you see smiling in all these pictures who did lose a lot of people in his life too. Like you want to see him do well. And so I think, those pictures of Ryland running around and doing well, like those are healing pictures for people too. So, and it's great to be able to have like some beautiful moments seen from that have happened, of course, since the tragedy. And Ryland running around and being a normal 6-year-old, of course, is part of that healing.
How would you describe how Ryland has recovered both physically and emotionally from what happened that day in Sutherland Springs? I'm sure there's been multiple changes in him from the months, both physically and perhaps in his own emotional recovery.
In the beginning, he definitely had when I first saw Ryland, he had a bit of a hitch. And he had a special shoe, and he would, kind of walk with a little bit of a hitch, if that makes any sense, like kind of lifting his leg up a little differently, a little bit of wasn't quite a limp. It was just, he walked differently. And he had a lot of healing in his arm. So, and a little, he had some other things going on that you could see, but he never let that slow him down from what I could see. And now I can't even tell at all. I mean, he was running around yesterday in flip-flops and running where I couldn't keep up with him. So I mean, if I really tried to run, I'm sure I could keep up with him. But I mean, he was running all over the place. He was at the playground. He was climbing on everything he could climb up on, including some things that were about to give me a heart attack that he was climbing up on. So, I mean, nothing unsafe, but he, but he just goes after it. And I personally, when I see him now, I mean, you might get a glimpse at a scar here and there, but otherwise, I don't think anyone would ever be able to tell. Definitely not be able to tell what he went through. And I don't know. I can't speak to Ryland's emotional state because I'm personally not comfortable getting into those kind of details with a 6-year-old. And I don't even know if he can articulate it himself. Ryland, when I see him, he wants to play. He wants to play with um, the kids his age, and he wants to play with his grandma and his grandpa when I see him, and he wants to play with his aunt Haley, who's actually think 2 or 3 years older than he is. She is adopted by his grandparents. And so, like, he's just, when I see him, he's just being a normal kid. You can't tell anything is different with him. So, I personally don't know what his emotional state is now, except for when you see him out, he seems like he's doing really well and trying his best to be like, run around and be a 6-year-old boy.
And then, Lisa, before we say goodbye, I just want to give you a chance for final thoughts for anything regarding Ryland and his family, or anything else you've experienced in the Sutherland Springs community. Obviously, you've spent a lot of time there on the ground as a photographer, as we've mentioned, one of those things that you still have to do on the ground for the most part. What are your thoughts moving forward? I'm guessing you're still going to be working on this story.
Yes, I mean, we'll keep telling their stories as long as they want us to, and as long as their healing continues and evolves. We'll definitely be following them through when their new church opens, probably late spring, early summer. It's already taking shape. I think they're about to put the roof on. I mean, it's a big church, and that's going to be a big deal when that opens. Yeah, it's just been, Rylan is just that. He is that light shining through, and there's so many lights and stories of healing and people supporting each other, and they all have their faith. Of course, not everyone, but most people have their faith that they lean on very heavily, and that helps them get through this as well. So we'll stay in the community. I expect for quite a while.
And a tremendous thank you to San Antonio Express News photographer Lisa Krantz for sharing her experiences with me today on our episode of the In-Depth Podcast, an interview program from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.